Hello and welcome, or welcome back to my channel. My name is S and I make Ren'Py minigame tutorials. Now, before we get into the video, I'd like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for supporting this channel, so thank you so much. And this is a list of the Patreon supporters under the supporter tab currently for this month, so thank you so much to Artisan Wizard for supporting this channel. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how you can create a shooting gallery minigame for your visual novels, where the goal is to hit targets with a cork gun. The targets are placed on 3 different shelves and have different sizes, where the larger ones are easier to hit. They are also flipping up and down at specified speeds, and you can only hit them once they are fully up. This will be done by animating each of the targets with several images, so-called frame-by-frame animation. When you have successfully hit a target, you'll get points based on the size of the target. Bigger targets are easier to hit, so they will give less points than the smaller ones. The game will also be time limited with a countdown timer present on the screen, so the player must get as many points as possible before the time runs out. Now let's go ahead and have a look at the tutorial outline. So for this tutorial, we're going to create a shooting gallery with 3 different shelves of targets. Each shelf is going to have different sized targets, which is going to make the game a little bit more challenging. Hitting a target is going to give you points, and these points are going to be depending on how big the target is. A smaller target is going to give you more points than a bigger one. To hit a target, we're going to use a custom crosshair cursor that the player can aim with, and when the user clicks with the mouse, a cork bullet is going to spawn and travel towards where the user clicked. We are also going to implement a time limit with a countdown timer visible on the screen, and when the time has run out, the player can see the final score and choose if they want to play again or quit. As an extra challenge to the player, the targets are also going to be flipping up and down, so you have to time your shooting to make sure that the cork hits the target when it's fully up. I also want to mention that the code for this tutorial has been made to work with PC games and have not been tested or optimized to work with other kinds of devices such as smartphones. With that said, these are the things that you're going to need in order to follow along with this tutorial. You're going to need a fresh Ren'Py project in the size 1280 x 720 pixels using the latest version of the Ren'Py engine. You're going to need the assets for this tutorial, which is available in the description box below. It is also good if you have some basic Python coding knowledge, as it's going to be a little bit easier to follow along with the coding. But if you don't, then you may still find this tutorial interesting and useful, and you may still learn a few things from it. While this tutorial series is going to be completely free to follow along, the completed script file that is going to be produced from this tutorial series is only going to be available for my patrons under the tier supporter or higher once this tutorial series has finished. And a link to my Patreon page is available in the description box below in case you want to get the script file that is going to be uploaded once the tutorial series has been completely finished. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started with the coding. So as usual, I've gone ahead and cleaned up the script file a bit so that I'm only left with the start label. Now, if you haven't already, you should make sure that you go down into the description box below and download all of the available image assets for this tutorial. And once you've done that, make sure that you add all of these images into the images folder of your Ren'Py project. So now we're going to go ahead and create some variables that we're going to use throughout the script. And the first variable is going to be the actual image for the cork gun. So for that, we're going to first of all create a $sign, as we're going to create the variables in Python language. And then we can call this variable cork gun image. And this variable is going to reference an image object that we're going to create by using the image function available in Ren'Py. So we're going to say image, and then we're going to add the path to the image, which is going to be images to refer to the images folder, and then cork gun.png, like so. Now we're also going to need another variable which is going to keep track of the actual size of the cork gun image, as we're going to need it later on in the script when we are creating certain calculations, which is going to help us to move the cork gun image around on the screen according to the mouse position. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say cork gun size, and this variable is going to point to a tuple, so we're going to create a set of brackets like so, and the first value is going to be the actual width, which is 330 pixels, and then the height is going to be 384 pixels. So these values you should grab from the actual size of your image, so you'll have to look it up if you're using another image than I have provided for this tutorial, and then add them into this tuple variable. Now, because all of the images that I have provided for this tutorial is twice as big than we want to have them displayed on the screen, we're going to have to divide these values by 2. So I'm going to say divided by 2 for the height, and the same for the width, divided by 2, like so. For the tutorials on this channel, I like to make sure that the images are at least twice as large than what I want to have them displayed on the screen, just to make sure that if we want to go full screen or resize the game a little bit larger, that the images don't look too blurry. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and create the next variable. And this variable is going to help us to keep track of where the cork gun is currently positioned on the screen. So we can call this variable cork gun pause, like so. And this one is also going to be referring to a tuple object. So we're going to create 2 brackets, like so. And the initial values we can give this tuple is going to be 0 and 0, like so. Then later on in the script, we're going to fill these with the correct values. Then we're also going to need a variable which is going to keep track of where the cork gun is originally positioned on the screen, as we want the cork gun to spawn in at the correct position when we start the game. So for this variable, we're going to say cork gun O pause, which stands for original position. And this one will also be referring to a tuple object. And the position that we want this cork gun to be when the game starts is going to be in the center of the screen on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we're going to have the gun positioned at the bottom of the screen. And to do that, we're going to create 2 calculations for the x and y position. And the calculation for the x position is going to look like this: renpy dot get physical size, and then we're going to add 2 square brackets, like so, and then we're going to add a 0 instead of that. Now this get physical size function that is available in Ren'Py is going to get the actual size of the window of the game, and then adding the square brackets afterwards and supplying an index value is going to make sure that we are grabbing the first value instead of the tuple that is returned by this function. And the first value is going to be the width of the window. Now, because we want the cork gun to be positioned at the center of the screen, we're going to divide this value by 2, like so. And then we're going to take into account the actual size of the cork gun for this calculation. So we're going to say minus cork gun size, and then we're going to grab the width value from this tuple, like so. And then we're going to divide that by 2 as well, like so. So this calculation is going to make sure that the cork gun is positioned at the center of the screen on the x-axis. Now for the y position of the cork gun, we're going to make sure that it is positioned at the bottom of the screen, but instead of having it exactly flush against the bottom of the screen, we're going to make sure that its bottom edge is a little bit further down. And to do that, we're going to say renpy dot get physical size, and then 2 square brackets. And then we're going to grab the second value of this tuple, which is going to be the height. So we're going to add a 1 instead of those brackets. And then we're going to say minus cork gun size, and then 1 instead of those brackets to grab the height of the cork gun. And then we're going to say plus 60. So now this calculation is going to give us, first of all, the height of the window of the game. And then we are subtracting the size of the cork gun, namely the height of it, which is going to position the cork gun with its very bottom edge flush against the bottom of the screen. But then we're adding 60 to that calculation, which is going to place the cork gun 60 pixels down from its bottom edge. Now, to actually be able to show this image on the screen and to resize it and position it like we want, we're going to create a transform. So we're going to create a new line, and then we can call this transform cork gun transform. And then to create the transform, we're going to use the transform function available in Ren'Py. So we're going to say transform, like so. And then we're going to give this transform some expected parameters. And one of them is child. So this one takes the image that should be displayed inside of this transform. And that is going to be the cork gun image. So we're going to say cork gun image, like so. And next, we're going to make sure that this image is half of its original resolution. So we're going to use the zoom property for this transform. So we're going to say zoom is equal to 0.5, like so. And now we can go ahead and position the cork gun according to the cork gun original position variable. So we're going to create a comma, and then we can say pos is equal to, and since the pos property of the transform takes a tuple, we're going to create two brackets, like so. And then we're going to specify the position, which is going to be cork gun o pos. And then we're going to grab the first value, which is the width. So we're going to add a 0 inside of those two square brackets, like so. And then comma, cork gun o pos, and then 1, like so. And now we're going to supply a function callback for this transform that is going to run once this transform has been added to a screen. So we're going to create a comma after this tuple, and then we're going to say function is equal to, and the function we're going to name cork gun transform, like so. And now we can go ahead and make sure that we are creating this cork gun transform function. And to do that, we're going to create an init Python block. So we're going to create a few of the lines above this start label. And then we're going to say init Python. And then we're going to create this function. So we're going to say def cork gun transform. And a transform function takes 3 arguments. One is going to hold the transform object, so I'm going to call this t. The next one is going to hold the shown time base, so I'm going to call it st. And the last one holds the animation time base, so we can call this at, like so. And I'm going to leave a link into the description box below where you can read more about transform functions. Now inside of this function, we're going to add some code to move the cork gun around on the screen according to the mouse position. But before we go ahead and do that, we're going to do some other things first. So for now, let's just go ahead and add a pass statement, like so. So now that we've added all of the necessary cork gun variables that we need, we can go ahead and add some of the screens that we're going to use for this game. Now I've gone ahead and prepared a screen that I'm going to call scene 1. That is going to be the first screen that is shown to the player when we start the game. Now this screen is not actually needed for the shooting game to work, but I'm going to create this in order to show you how you can get to the shooting game from another screen. Because in your game, you're most likely going to have several screens and you want to be able to get to the shooting game from one of them. So this one is just going to be a simple example to show you how you can do that. So we're going to go ahead and create a few of the lines underneath here, like so. And then we're going to go inwards all the way in the annotations. And then we're going to say screen, scene 1. And here we want to add a background image for the first scene. So we're going to say image. And then for the path, we're going to say images, scene 1 background .png, like so. And now since this image is going to be twice as large as we want it to be displayed on the screen, we're going to have to resize it to be half of its original resolution. So to do that, I'm going to create a new transform that is simply just going to make the image half of its size. So I'm going to create a few of the lines above this screen. And then I'm going to say transform, half, size, and then zoom 0.5, like so. And now I'm going to apply this transform to the image. So I'm going to say at half size. So now whenever we have an image that we need to resize to be half of its original resolution, then we can simply reuse this half size transform. So the next thing we're going to do is to add an image button to the screen, and this image button is going to allow us to enter into the actual minigame. The ideal version of the image button is going to be a completely transparent color, which is going to make sure that it's invisible. But then when we hover over the image button, we're going to see an image being revealed, which is going to be a slightly transparent white color. So to do that, we're going to say image button. And now to make the image button completely transparent in its idle state, we're going to say idle solid to make a solid color. And now it doesn't really matter what color we're giving this image button, as it's going to be completely transparent. So I'm going to make it a white color with 0 opacity. So I'm going to add a hash symbol and then 6 F characters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 2 zeros to make it completely transparent. And now for the hover version of this image button, I'm going to add one of the images from the images folder. So we're going to say hover and then images And this image is called scene 1 SG, which stands for shooting gallery, button.png, like so. And this image is a slightly transparent white color, which is going to show whenever we are hovering over this image button. But now we also need to position this on the screen so that it is in the correct location. So for that, we're going to say align, and this one is going to be aligned at 0.7 and 0.3, like so. And now we also need to make sure that this image button is half of its original resolution. So we're going to say at half size. So now when we click on this image button, we need to make sure that the shooting gallery minigame is opened up. So for that, we're going to add an action property. So we're going to say action, and then we're going to show a screen that we haven't yet created. So we're going to say show, and this screen we're going to call shooting gallery, like so. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and create this shooting gallery screen. So we're going to go ahead and create a few empty lines, and then go inwards once in the indentations, and then we're going to say screen shooting gallery. And the first image that's going to be shown on the screen is going to be the background image for the actual targets. So we're going to say image, images, targets, background, .png. And then we gotta remember to make this half of its original size. So we're going to say at half size. The next thing we're going to add on the screen is going to be the actual targets. But these targets are going to be created by using a sprite manager object, and we're going to create that a little bit later. So for now, let's go ahead and add the other things to the screen first. So the next thing that comes after the targets is going to be the background image that goes on top of the targets, as well as the target background. So we're going to say image, images, shooting gallery, background, .png. And then we're going to resize this, so we're going to say at half size. The next image we're going to add is a spotlight image, that is the actual lights that are coming from the roof of the shooting gallery. And this image we're going to apply an additive blending mode to, which is going to make it look more like its actual light. So that we're going to say image, images, spotlights, .png. And now we're going to add a new transform to this image, which is going to make it have an additive blending mode. So we're going to say at spotlights, which is what we're going to call this transform. And now we can create this transform underneath this half size transform. So we're going to say transform spotlights. And now we're first of all going to make sure that this image is half of its original size. So we're going to say zoom 0.5, and then we're going to say blend, add, and then we're going to set the alpha of this image to be slightly less opaque. So we're going to say alpha 0.5, like so. And then after that we have the cork gun transform. So we're going to say add cork gun transform, like so. And then after that we have the UI element, which is the score background image that is going to be added to the top left corner. So we're going to say image, images, score background, .png. And this one we're going to position on the screen. So we're going to say pause, and it is going to be positioned at 10 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis. And then we're going to resize this, so we're going to say at half size. So now let's go ahead and see what this looks like inside of the game. So to do that, we need to make sure that we are calling the scene 1 screen from our start label. So we're going to create a new line underneath here, and then we're going to say call screen scene 1, like so. So now let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So here inside of the game we can see that we have the first scene visible, which is showing the shooting gallery from the outside view. And if we hover the mouse over the shooting gallery, we can see that a transparent white color is appearing, and this is the actual image button that we added earlier. So now if we click on this, we can see that we have entered into the shooting gallery minigame. And so far we have just added a bunch of images, and the cork gun isn't really following the mouse around when we move it. So let's go back into the code and implement some more things. So the next thing we're going to do is to make sure that the cork gun is following the mouse as we're moving it around on the screen. So for that, we're going to go back up into the cork gun transform function right here. And then here, we're first of all going to make some variables into globals so that we can change them inside of this function. And these variables are going to be the cork gun pos variable as well as cork gun opos. So we're going to say global cork gun pos and global cork gun opos, like so. And now we also need to know where the cursor is located on the screen so that we can have the cork gun follow its coordinates. And to do that, we're going to create a new local variable to this function. And this variable we can call mousepos. And to get the coordinates of the cursor, we're going to use a function available in Ren'Py called getMousePos. So we're going to say renpy.getMousePos, like so. And this function is going to return a tuple object with the x and y coordinates. So now we're going to go ahead and move the cork gun on the x-axis according to where the mouse is positioned on the screen. But we don't want the cork gun to ever go beyond the left or the right edge of the game window. So to prevent that, we're going to create an if statement that is going to help to check that for us. So we're going to create a few of the lines. And the if statement is going to look like this. If mousepos at the index of 0, so we're grabbing the x coordinate of the mouse cursor, and then we're going to say minus cork gun size at the index of 0, which is grabbing the width from the cork gun size tuple, and then we're going to say divided by 2 is less or equal to renpy.get physical size, and then we're going to grab the width of the window, so we're going to add a 0 instead of that, and then minus cork gun size at the index of 0, like so. So if this condition is evaluated to true, then that means that we can keep on moving the cork gun to the right, but if it evaluates to false, then that means that we have hit the very right edge of the window and can no longer move it to the right. And then we also need to check the left side of the window. So for that, we're going to say and mouse pos at the index of 0 is more or equal to cork gun size at the index of 0 for the width divided by 2, like so. So as long as the x position of the mouse is more or equal to the cork gun's width divided by 2, then we can keep on moving the cork gun to the left. But if it evaluates to false, then we have reached the left edge of the screen and can no longer move the cork gun to the left. And now inside of this if statement, we're going to move the cork gun according to the x coordinate of the mouse. So in order to move the cork gun, we're going to fill the cork gun pos variable with the correct coordinates. And then we're going to make sure that the transform object moves according to the values that we have set inside of this variable. So to do that, we're going to say cork gun pos is equal to, and then we're going to add 2 brackets like so. And then we're going to add the equation that is going to determine the position of the cork gun on the x-axis, and that is going to look like this. Mousepos at the index of 0, which is going to grab the x coordinate of the mouse, minus cork gun size at the index of 0, which is going to grab the width of the cork gun, divided by 2. Now this is going to make sure that the cork gun is following the mouse on the x-axis according to its center position. Now because this cork gun pos variable is a tuple object, we can't just update one of its values without doing the other as well. We have to rewrite the tuple completely every time we want to change something. So even though we're going to determine the y position of the cork gun later on in this function, we have to add a second value straight away now. So in this case, we're just going to use the original y position of the cork gun as a second value. So we're going to add a comma, and then we're going to say cork gun opos, and then 2 square brackets, and then say 1, like so. And then underneath this if statement, we're going to make sure that we're moving the transform according to the values that we have just added into the cork gun pos variable. So we're going to say t dot xpos is equal to cork gun pos at the index of 0, like so. So now the transform object is going to move on the x-axis according to the value that we have inside of the cork gun pos variable. And by doing it this way, we can make sure that the cork gun pos variable is only updated as long as the conditions inside of this if statement is true. So when the mouse position is, for example, too far to the left in the game window or too far to the right, this if statement is going to evaluate to false, and the cork gun pos variable is not going to update the new coordinates. So the transform in such a case is going to keep its x position that it had before the mouse reached the end of the window. And this is going to visually result in that the transform is staying at the end of the window where the mouse reached. And then when we move the mouse back into the window, it's going to follow it as normal again. Now before we go ahead and add some code to move the transform on the y-axis, we're going to make sure that the movement on the x-axis is working correctly. And to do that, we need to supply a return statement to this function with the amount of seconds that it should take before this function is run again. So to do that, we're going to say return 0. And as I mentioned before, I have left a link into the description box below where you can read more about transform functions if you want to learn more about how it works. So now let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see how this works like. So now that we are back inside of the game again, we're going to go ahead and test to see if the cork gun is going to move with the mouse on the x-axis. And as we can see, that does indeed seem to be working as the cork gun is following the mouse on the screen. And if we reach one of the edges, we can see that the cork gun stops before it gets clipped off on the edge. And the same on this side. It stops before it reaches too far to the right. So now we're going to go back into the code and add some y-axis movement to this cork gun. Now for the y movement of the cork gun, we're not going to have it move to the exact location of the mouse on the screen on the y-axis, as this would just cause the cork gun to block the view. Instead, we're going to have the cork gun move only slightly up and down according to the mouse movement. And to do this, we're going to create a calculation that is going to determine the distance between the center point on the y-axis of the window and the mouse position. So based on that distance divided by 7, we're going to get a value that we can move the cork gun with. And this value is going to be much smaller than the location of the mouse on the y-axis, which is going to result in a much smaller movement. So for that, we're going to say cork gun pos is equal to, and the first value of this tuple is the x coordinate, and since we already have defined what the x position is of the cork gun up here, we're just going to refer to that value. So we're going to say cork gun pos at the index of 0, like so. So now we're grabbing the x value from the cork gun pos variable and supplying it into a new tuple. And then for the y value, we're going to say cork gun opos at the index of 1, which is going to grab the original y position of the cork gun, and then we're going to say plus a set of brackets, and then instead of those we're going to say mousepos at the index of 1, which is going to grab the y coordinate of the mouse, minus renpy dot get physical size, and then we're going to grab the height of the window, so we're going to add a 1 inside of those two brackets, and then we're going to say divided by 2, and then inside of those brackets we're going to say divided by 7, like so. So now this calculation is going to make the cork gun move on the y-axis based on the distance between the mouse pos and the center of the screen on the y-axis divided by 7. And this is going to make the cork gun move only slightly up and down as we move the mouse. Now whatever value you're dividing this calculation with, in this case it's 7, is going to determine how fast the movement is going to be. A smaller number is going to make it move faster, and a larger number is going to make it move slower. And you can of course experiment with this value to see what works best for you, but one thing to note is that if you make the movement a lot faster, then there's a risk that the bottom edge of the image is going to be revealed and leave a gap between the bottom of the window and the image. To account for that, you can make sure that you either move the cork gun much lower down in its original position, or you make the cork gun image a little bit taller. That way, the cork gun is going to have a little bit more image that is hidden beyond the bottom of the window and can be revealed when the mouse is moving up on the screen. So now we need to make sure that we also move the transform on the y-axis based on this value that we've just given to the cork gun pos variable. So we're going to say t.ypos is equal to cork gun pos at the index of 1, like so. So now we can go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see how this looks like. So now let's go into the minigame again and move the mouse around a bit. And as we can see, when we move the mouse up and down, the cork gun is slightly moving up and down as well. And then sideways, and then up and sideways as well. So now we know that that is working correctly. So in the next part of this tutorial, we're going to continue to add a cork bullet and some targets on the screen. So I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.